how to use shapes, live effects such as blurs and gradients, as well as adjustment layers and a little bit more in Affinity Photo. First thing to do, I'm going to create a very, very basic shape. Of course, you could start with any shape. Don't have to use a circle. You could use stars and polygons, whatever. I'm going to use a gradient. So go to the top left and select a fill color of a gradient. Now, first default is obviously white to white, but there's a swatches panel and you find that in View and Studio and Swatches. And there's a few swatches available, but of course you can create your own. So you can just select from those gradients and just select one that's really nice and colourful that you can use in your thing. But you can always create your own gradient, and there are many tutorials about that on the channel. And you could also add another shape. You could go for 10, 15 shapes. I'm just going to go for a couple. But you could create your own using the pen tool or something like that. And again, you can fill that with a gradient, a different colour. And you can apply it a couple of times, maybe again change the gradient, maybe to one of the others. So you've got your colourful design now. What can you do with that? Well, you can add blurs to it. Of course, you could add other filters as well, live filter layers. But I'm going to go with blurs. And the key panel here is layers. And you can find that in the View and Studio and Layers. I'll just change the thumbnails a bit because I'm going to have a few layers here. It's all very layer centric. So with nothing selected, so I've got none of the layers selected, what you can do, you can go to your layer menu, and then you can add a live filter layer. And there's a lot of them. Wow, it's a fair amount, but I'm going for the blurs, and there's about 12 or so there. But I'm going for a more interesting one like the radial blur, or of course motion blur, etc. And you can combine them, so you don't have to have just one, you could have 2, 3, 10 different blurs. So you can see now in the layers panel, it's just been applied right above the top. And what you can do, you can change the angle. So straight away, you can see the pretty colourful effect created out of those just 3 basic shapes with a gradient. And you can change the angle, and you can always go back to it. That's the great thing about live filter layers. You can always go back to them at a later point. So you can keep changing the angle, but you can also change the origin point as well. You can also use the preserve alpha. You can turn that on and off. Personally, I'm going to turn it off, but you can see all that happens is it you can just use the shape. I prefer the effect to be all over the image, but each their own. And what you can do, you can change the origin point, so you can just move that around. So you can maybe emphasis on the circle there, or maybe on one of the donuts, or maybe completely away from all of the shapes. And you can keep moving those as well as changing the value of the angle. So you can create some very unusual sort of rainbow-like, weird, colourful effects. Now what you could do, you could merge visible via the layer menu and then combine this. Now one trouble with this is that you've got it going over the edge, so there'll always be a line. So maybe if you're going to create some like amazing design like this, you can also use blending modes. So you can run through the blending modes for the radial blur. But if you want to create it it's probably best to create a very big document and maybe create the design quite small in the center. And then of course, once you merged all the visible, you can then move that layer around and combine it using blending modes as well, and maybe apply effects to that as well. So you've got your design there, and that's using blending mode, which you can always go back and change just by double clicking on the radial blur entry there. You just bring it up again, and you can change it, blending mode, to lighten or difference, whatever, or change the angle or position. And of course, you can always change the underlying shapes as well. You could add another shape. So I've got 3 there. I could go and add another shape. I could also change the colour. And if you click on the shape, you can see the outline of the shape. Obviously, you can see the colour there. But as you move it around or resize it or distort it, etc., you can see the blur effect changes as well. So you can create some very interesting designs, or maybe go out like that and you can see it moving away from or closer to the origin point, and you can see the change. And of course you could change the gradient as well. So you can maybe go click on there and change it to something else. There's a whole range of different gradients, and of course you can create your own gradient. And you can resize it, you can see the effect there. And of course what you could do, and I haven't done this actually, you can vary the blending mode of those shape layers as well. So you could turn that, not normal, obviously the blend between, you could turn it into a difference, etc. But you can also go to the layer menu and convert to curves. So what can you do then? Well, it's lost the donut feature, but it does mean you can change the points or the nodes. So you can go over to the node tool, and with the node tool selected, what you can do, you can then tweak, you can drag it out that way, drag it around, you can add additional points and create all kinds of weird and wonderful shapes. But again, as you change the shape, you'll see that the radial blur changes, and you maybe could make a much more complex shape than that. Maybe add nodes all the way around and then drag them out to create more like star-like, rounded star-like design. And again, you can continue to modify that, move that around. You could turn that into more elliptical design and then rotate it. So maybe duplicate the design and maybe change the blending mode between the two. Deselect all the things, deselect the radial blur. Now select it, of course. What you can do, you can duplicate that. Or maybe create another layer. Now if you've got that selected, now I'll duplicate there, so I can duplicate that. See the design there? So you've got two. And of course what you can do, you can modify the center, and they're separate. They're not the same layer. It's a different layer, so you can move around, so you can get even more weird and wonderful designs. And what you can do, you can go down there to the blend mode. You can change the angle, change the blend mode to something else, say darken or whatever. Difference. But you can also see as you change that linear burn, dark color, lighten, screen. So it goes screen there, lighter color, add. So you select add, and you'll notice in the layers panel, it's changed. It's gone to add there as well. And you can again continue to move the origin point and change the angle as well. And you can close it, and you can double click and go back to it anytime, or you can just delete it. If you don't want that double entry, you can go down the bottom and you can delete that entry. And just see there, little trash can, click there and delete it. So it's gone. So now you've just got one. Now, got that selected. Now I shouldn't select it, because what happens now, I'm just adding another blur, and I didn't notice when I was doing this, I must admit, that I've had it selected. So I've added a motion blur, and what happens is, I'm thinking when I'm doing this, I'm thinking nothing's changing, not very much changing. In fact, nothing's changing. The reason being is that the blur is being applied to the radial blur, which it doesn't have any substance. So you can apply a motion blur to something that's got nothing in it, and it's not going to be any use. What you can do, you can drag it, you can select it and put it up to the top. So it's above the radial blur now. Now it has an effect, and you can see the radial, and you can move them around. I can put it down between certain shapes. So the shape there, one shape is being affected. Now, if I move it up to the top, all the shapes are selected and modified using that blur. And of course you can double click on that and you can bring up the panel. And what you can do then, you can change the rotation and you can see the effect dragging out. And the radial blur is still being applied. So you're blurring the radial blur and all the shapes below it. And you can change the rotation, you can change the radius. And of course what you can do, you can go to the opacity, but you can also go to the blending modes. And you can run through experiment. You can go with lighten, screen, difference, etc. Contrast, negate, and so on and so on. You might just decide normal. So you've got now 5 different layers, and they're all layers, and they're still editable. So that donut is still can be modified. You can still move it around, and all the motion blur and radial blur will change to reflect that. You can see it moving around. And you can select on one of those, the one below, and change it again. So if you want to change the origin point, you can see that, but the motion blur is still being applied to that change. And you can continue to do that. Now, what you can also do with these things is you can obviously duplicate the layers, but you can add other layers as well. So deselect everything, make certain everything's deselected. Otherwise, again, if you selected it and then applied it, it will be applied to the thing itself. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to add an adjustment layer. That's via the layer menu. And I'm going to select one of them. There's loads. There's loads. There's gradient maps, pretty good. HSL's pretty good. Recolor, they're all pretty good. They all have their purposes. So I'm using HSL. And what I can do then, now the result of this is somewhat slightly garish, and you may not wish to do this, but you can make some garish color changes by changing the hue shift or saturation shift, etc. So you can move those around, and you've still got blend modes as well, exactly the same as before. So you can use darken, different, and again, run through all those. So you decide on that, say color burn, just as good as any. And you can see it modifies the radial, modifies zoom. And again, the blend mode at the top is the color burn that was for that layer. And again, you still got access to the shapes, and you can still move it around. Still move all that around. You can double click on that one again and change origin point and so on. So you can see you can really create all kinds of very abstract designs. Now, once you've, of course, created these designs, what you can do, you can turn them into pixel layers by using merge visible. So once you've merged them in visible, then you can apply other effects to those. So maybe you go to distort and deform and all those sort of things. But what you can also do with none of them selected, so I have no layer selected, what you can do is go to another one, layer, a new adjustment layer, maybe use black and white. And you can see you can create some very interesting, weird and wonderful designs. And again, you've still got the blend modes if you wish to use those. So you can change the blend so you can still see some colour coming through, but black and white being the key for that. I don't particularly want that. I'm just going to delete it. But I wanted to show you, you can have 2 or 3 adjustments, if not more. Obviously, the more and more layers you add, the slower it's going to be at some point. Now, what you could do, you could add new fill layers. You can also add a mask layer. So I'm going to go for new mask layer. Now, made a mistake again because I had that selected. But you can fix it very quick and easy. Simply go to the mask layer and move it. Or undo and then deselect everything. Just as easy. Then go to layer menu and new mask layer. And now it's above. So it's above that. And what you do, it's a layer. You can, of course, change blending modes, etc., etc. You can also modify the mask layer. And what you can do, in black, go there and change the colour to black or maybe a grey. And then you can apply a mask. And you can see you mask the whole lot out. So you can see through to the background. And you, of course, could put it to white to bring it back as well. So you can splatter over there, but you can also go to any of the other layers as well. And you can drag that down now to another layer. Don't have to recreate it or select, simply just drag. Maybe move down to radial blur or motion blur. Now it's connected with the motion blur. So the motion blur is effective. You can see now the motion blur has suddenly been reduced, been changed because you've added that mask layer to it. If I move it down again, it goes to radial blur. And that's affected. And you can continue to add your brush to it. And you can see it just updating very slowly. I'm not saying it's the quickest thing, but you can use the brush strokes. And you can see then as you do that, the overall blur is changed. You can see the effect very subtly going through there because, of course, the motion blur is quite prominent. But you can change it maybe to white and then get rid of the black. So you bring more of the radial blur back in again, if you want to do that. It's finally come up. Sometimes when you click on things and it just doesn't, the colour thing doesn't appear. It's always weird. But you can just go and apply it, put it back. And again, the thumbnail will show it. Unfortunately, it's very hard to see the mask now without obviously probably deselecting all the others above. But you can see it within the confines of the thumbnail there. But what you can do, it's a pixel layer, basically, the mask. So as a layer, what you can do, you can go and apply effects to it. Now I love something like the deform, but I'm using white and I'm using black, but you could use grey as well, just to create some subtle difference, a graduation between it. But what you can do, just go in there, you've got brushes, view menu, studio and brushes. Now I've been using the one of the spray brushes. That was because I was using it in an earlier tutorial. But you can, of course, go and use maybe one of the ink brushes, and sometimes some very strong brush instead of something like that. You can really see the result much clearer. So if I apply that, you can apply it over and it comes more dramatic like that. And you can see the blur coming back in again there, or not, the other way around, depending on the colour of the brush. Now, if you go back to view, I don't know what happened there with the layers panel. It just suddenly disappeared. So view and studio and layers, and you can see the brush again. You can see all the brush strokes added to the mask. And now, of course, I'm using brushes, but you could use other things as well, other designs inside the mask. Now, what you can do, you can go to filters, blur, or maybe filters, distort and deform. A favourite of mine, deform. Now, in this case, it's very hard to see the deform, of course, again, without making all the other layers invisible. But you can add some pins, and then you can just shift. And you can see as you shift, you can see the result of that shift, and it will distort and deform in there. And you can move them around, but I just want to show you that more than for it to create an amazing design. But you can change the mask using things like deform or mirror, etc., etc. And you can always remove it. It's a layer. You can always just delete it if you don't want the mask. You can deselect everything if you want, or you can go and select one of the layers, up to you. Sometimes it doesn't want to deselect. You think, why doesn't it deselect? Sometimes it's just easy, just click on one of the layers, click there, and then go back to the bottom. Then it deselects. I don't know. So you've got no layer selected now. What you can do, of course, you can always add additional layers. You can always add another live filter layer if you wish, another blur, but you can also just merge visible. And I'm just going to merge the lot all into a single design. Now I can remove all the layers below, or just click on there, make them not visible. And you can go through there and you can see the mask just then. Click on there and click on it, and they're still there. So if you wanted to use them, you could. Now it's a pixel layer, of course. Now what you can do, you can add brush strokes to it, you can add deform to it, etc., etc. Now the one trouble with this, because I created it in a fairly small document, you see it's gone over the edge. The blurs have gone over the edge. So you've ended up with a straight line. So if you want to create a design that you can sort of duplicate and manipulate, say with blending modes, it would be best to create the design with a bigger document and work really in the center of the design. And what you can do, hold down the Alt or Option key and duplicate and move it around. You can rotate it, distort it, you can use deform, etc. Move that there. You can build up a very complex motion zoom effect there. And of course, what you can also do, you can use blending modes to combine between them. You can also go to deselect everything. So I've deselected everything now, and then go for maybe another filter, maybe radial blur, to apply radial blur on top of all those designs. Now the original shape now is long gone. This is obviously just a pixel, but the core shape obviously is all the way back. And you can always undo if you want to go back to that state. Or maybe save it. Save the document before you do any sort of destructive work like merge visible. Or just save the layers. Would be even easier. So you can apply this radial blur. You can also, of course, use blending modes to go through those. Again, add more than one live filter layer as well is always a good idea, and use blending modes there. And so on and so on. And again, merge visible and combine. And you could continue. And often I do. When I go through these things, I think, oh, that's a good way. I can work with other things. And you can move that, and you can see you can create some really amazing gradients by simply moving radial designs like that using the radial blur. Of course, you could use other blurs as well. And you can, of course, recolor that if you wish using adjustment layers, maybe apply other effects, merge visible again to blend them all into one. Once you've done that, you can remove all the lower layers if you wish. Create more layers, and so on and so on. I hope you found this tutorial of interest. Please subscribe to the Graphicxtras channel, always adding new tutorials about Affinity Photo, Photoshop, Illustrator, and many others. Please add some comments, always appreciated. Always nice to hear about how things are working. Also, dislike or like. Thank you much.